disease, a wicked proportion. Love of money and gold. Its cure will never be had.
Thank you to all the folks that helped to organize this and put this together. Thank you all for coming out and being here to be part of this great conference. My name is Tre Arrow. I'm definitely very honored to be here and share a little bit about my story. Certainly dovetails very nicely with some of the things that Lauren was just speaking about as far as how activists are persecuted, like the case with many of the defendants and the clients of Lauren. My case wouldn't have had anything if it wasn't for a snitch, and his name was Jake as well, but different Jake. His name was Jake Sherman. And you know, some folks might know a bit about my name and my reputation or some of the things that I've been involved with. Basically, in 2000, I was involved very extensively with a campaign to help save Eagle Creek, an area that's very near here, out in the Mount Hood National Forest. And it's an area that was very near and dear to many people, including local politicians like Senator Ron Wyden and Earl Blumenauer, city councils, because this is not just an area that has beautiful spotted owl and ancient forest with some of the last bit of old growth Douglas fir trees. It also is a very sacred watershed for this entire area, from not just the backup to Portland, but the direct water supply to Lake Oswego and Oregon City and West Linn. So this was an area that had many, many years of protest in effort to save this area from being destroyed. And I spent 5 weeks out there. I had done a lot of rock climbing in my earlier years, and I grew up tree climbing in Florida, but never with lines and stuff. And I took one look at the road blockade out at Eagle Creek, and they had this pod suspended above the ground about 60 feet, and it was basically like a suspended cot where one person was living in this pod, and it was attached to the gate of the Forest Service road. They put these gates on the roads, even though it's public land, they lock them. Unless you want to kill animals or kill trees, they lock the gates. So what we did is I should say they, because I came on the scene a little bit after this had already been erected. But what they did was they used their locking people out against them, and they attached this suspended pod with very small 4mm line to the gate, with the idea that if that gate was moved, opened, or anything, that theoretically it would cause the pod to fall, the person in the pod to die. So it was used as a very effective tactic to keep the Forest Service and the logging at bay, which it did. And I took one look at that pod and I was like, I'm going to do that. So within a matter of minutes of arriving on the scene, this is June 1st, 2000, I climbed up in the pod, the person that was up there climbed down, and I stayed up there for 4 days and didn't touch the ground. And within literally a matter of days, those trees and the other men and women out there became my family. And I've always had a connection to this earth, and many years prior to this action, I began to develop a stronger and stronger passion for a vegan diet, for living sustainably, for living without an automobile, for not putting anything into a landfill, to helping to save trees. And I knew that even though I wasn't buying any new butt wipe or any new virgin paper or wood, that the trees were still falling. And so I had heard about Julie Butterfly living up in the redwood for more than a year. At the time, I learned of her escapade in '98. Well, she had already been up there for almost a year. And so I thought to myself, I want to do something that will put my life and my body in between that which I think is sacred and that which is attempting to destroy it. And it was the strongest sense of purpose that I had ever felt in my entire life when I climbed up into that pod. And I knew that my body and those on the ground were literally keeping those trees from being murdered. And I came into the city in early of July, pretty much against my wishes, yet we needed resupplying of people and resources and stuff for the camp. So I took it upon myself to come in and do some outreach. And while I was in the city on July 7th, 2000, camps were raided out at Eagle Creek. And just like Lauren mentioned with the paramilitary tactics that these agencies love to use our tax dollars to arrest and brutalize and intimidate and harass peaceful, nonviolent activists. Hello? That's exactly what happened that day. They came in at 4 o'clock in the morning. They raided our camps. They had knives, weapons, pepper spray. They immediately put a closure in the area saying that anyone that's in this area, if you have to be within 15 minutes. And if anyone's caught in this area after that, you're now trespassing, even though it's public land, and you'll be arrested. Well, 4 women chose to stay up in those structures. We had a lower road and an upper road. And we had a pod on each, and then a tree sit supporting that pod. So there's a total of 4 structures at these gates, and 4 women chose to stay up. Everyone else on the ground left. And by the end of the day, all 4 women had been violently removed and taken down, and it's a miracle that nobody died that day. One woman who at the time was going by the name of Pitch cut 5 of those 6 support lines when she was hanging up above the pod as a deterrent. But basically what they did is they untied the lines, retied them, which again by all accounts should have caused the pod to fall, opened up the gate, brought in a cherry picker so they could raise themselves up to the level of the tree sits in the pods, and then proceeded to yank one woman out by the noose that she had put around her neck as a deterrent. And this woman, Pitch, kept shouting, "Don't come any closer, I'm going to cut my support lines." And they kept coming closer, so she kept cutting her support lines to 1 4mm line. So anyway, we were outraged that they had taken these kinds of tactics to arrest, to intimidate activists, to still push forward a logging sale that so many people were so extensively against. So we organized a rally that day, July 7th, 2000, down at the Forest Service building, downtown Southwest 2nd and Stark. And I rode down there in my bare feet, on a bike, just not knowing what the building was like, and not really knowing much about the downtown, because I don't like big cities really. And I took one look at the building, and it looked like there were some notches in the bricks, and it looked like there was a ledge about 3 stories up, and I was like, hey, someone should climb up there and get people's attention as to why we're here, because it was 6 o'clock at night. You know, not a lot of people knew what had happened, and I really wanted to do something to create attention to why we were there and what had happened that day to get people involved and activated. And people looked at me like I had about 4 heads when I said that, so I was like, all right, I will then. So I just spontaneously climbed the building, this little 9-inch ledge, and lived on it for 11 days to protest what had happened that day, and also the overall logging at Eagle Creek, and then the greater picture of just the insidious corruption within our government and our corporate structures. Well, I basically had a podium for 11 days with a bullhorn, with constant media attention and media reporting, and the government didn't like that very much, because they really couldn't shut me up or turn me off. And we generated an enormous amount of money for our campaign, of attention, awareness, information. People were writing letters, making calls, calling every politician, from the Secretary of Agriculture to Al Gore, who was running for president at the time. Remember, this is 2000, right before Bush stole the election. And we ended up getting that sale canceled. So Eagle Creek is saved, and it's preserved, never to be cut again. So while I was on the ledge, I was labeled as a domestic terrorist by the FBI. Not hurting a fly, not even touching anyone or anything. And this is part of their COINTELPRO. Like Lauren mentioned, they like to see people that they view as leaders, or at least just to make an example out of people. They like to label and target and silence people one way or another. They've murdered a lot of activists throughout the years with the American Indian Movement, Black Panther Party. Judy Berry and Daryl Cherney were bombed in 1990, I believe. So this is not a new tactic. Basically, they wanted me silenced because they saw that I was an effective activist. For those 11 days, we generated more support for Eagle Creek while I was on the ledge than probably the entire campaign for many years. And it certainly was a pivotal point in getting that sale canceled, that ledge sit. And I was part of those arsons. I did take part in those arsons. There was one that happened in March of, or is it April? I think April of 2001 at Ross Island Sand and Gravel. Some cement trucks were burned. And that was because they have completely obliterated that island that used to be an island. Now it's like a little small crescent moon, if you will. That's also an endangered species habitat for the bald eagle. While I was just riding on the Springwater Corridor 2 days ago, which runs right next to Ross Island, a bald eagle flew over over my head. And then they were still, even though the legislature was very successful in 2000, and subsequently a hold was put on the sale, a temporarily suspended hold to conduct an independent review. By the spring of 2001, less than a year later, the Forest Service is still talking about pushing forward with logging that area. And so I had done everything that I knew I possibly could to stop those trees from being killed. And I felt desperate. I felt like we need to do something drastic in order to stop this from happening. So I took place in these arsons that burned some of the logging trucks that were the very contractors to take the trees out at Eagle Creek. It's a place called Chopert Logging Out on 224 on the way to Eagle Creek near Estacada. Well, I always know that my intuition is never faulty. And the few times that I don't trust my intuition, I get burned. And I knew this little young punk, Jake Sherman, was a little bit too mature and a little bit too young to keep his mouth shut. And I told him, you can't tell anybody what we did. He was like, all right, I won't. Well, sure enough, he blabs to his girlfriend. His girlfriend's father is a fire marshal. The day after these arsons took place, on June 1st of 2001, his dad called the FBI and said, I think my son may have been involved in that arson that took place last night. So they were on him from the very beginning. And unfortunately, he decided to be a snitch and turn informant, and then the other two people that were involved in the Chopert logging decided to follow suit. So I was left with basically taking my case to trial and having three people take the stand and say, yeah, he was part of it, and I was looking at a life sentence. Like Lauren mentioned, typically these things. I was in Canada. Folks may know that I'm on the computer, I'm traveling around the country. This is August now of 2002, and someone sends me this email, like, Trey, you might want to check this out. So I go to the link of Portland Indie Media, and it's like spread out all over, like, wanted, Tre Arrow. And so I was like, okay, it's a good time to see Canada. So I was on the run for almost 2 years in Canada, and then I was arrested and incarcerated for almost 4 years in Canada. And for folks that think that Canada is a great, friendly nation and that the prisons must be like a vacation camp, don't fool yourselves. Actually, I had more difficulties in Canadian prisons than I did the last bit here in the States. That's not to say that there aren't horrible conditions in like the CMUs that Lauren's talking about, that some of us activists, not myself, but other activists have been placed in. They're no joke and they're no fun. And each state and each province in Canada has different conditions. So certainly there are some of the most egregious conditions in this country. Yet from my personal experience, in the 5 different locations that I was, 2 in Canada and 3 in the States, I had harder times in Canada than I did in the States. So if it weren't for this snitch, Jake, they had no evidence against me. They had no fingerprint, they had no piece of hair, they had nothing. All they had was him and now 2 others saying Trey did it. So anyway, getting back to what I was saying about Lauren mentioning prison sentences, while I was in Canada, people knew what I was charged with, and they're like, Trey, if we did that here, we'd be looking at like a year or 2. And I was literally looking at a life sentence. They brought these huge weapons type charges against me. I had 14 counts, 7 of each arson that I was accused of, the Ross Island, and then 7 for the Chopert logging. And one of the charges, it was 924C, I believe. You can look it up. It's very interesting. It's like a big bombs, weapons, missiles, hand grenades charge. And then it says, or other incendiary device. Well, what they accused me of constructing was a milk jug filled with gasoline with incense and matches as a time delay device. And that is analogous to a bomb, a missile, or a hand grenade. And so they were going to have an ATF official take the stand and say, yes, this is analogous to this is an incendiary device. And so that charge alone, that one charge, carries a minimum of 30 years if found guilty. And then for a second offense, the minimum is life. And I was charged with 2 offenses. So I was literally looking at a life plus sentence. And the way that these charges were all interconnected, it was very hard to maybe get some dropped and be found guilty of just a couple. So my lawyers were saying, look, Trey, you either beat it all or or you're going to go down with it all. And so as much as I didn't want to take the plea agreement, I did take non-cooperation plea agreement, which means I gave no information about anyone or anything to the government, and they handed me a 78-month sentence. And with all my time in Canada and a little bit of good time that they gave me, then by the time I was sentenced in August of '08, I only had less than a year left until I got out of prison. But then the last 6 months was halfway house and home confinement, which was definitely no fun because it still is actually under the BOP, the Bureau of Prisons jurisdiction. So I just don't answer questions. I had to write out a form every time I wanted to leave the house. And they just want you to be a slave. They just want you to work, and that's it. And they want to see that you're paying taxes and that you're working for the man, and then that means that you're rehabilitated. Right, and then pay $155,000 of restitution that they're slapping at me. Like these insurance companies don't have enough money, so they want me to pay them back. So anyway, that's a little bit about my story. The point is that under normal circumstances, if anything, arson, they do take arson pretty seriously. And according to my knowledge, the charges that I was charged with, or at least the 2 arson counts that I pled guilty to, carried a minimum of 60 months. So I wasn't able to get anything less than 5-year sentence. But certainly there's a huge disparity between 5 years and life, or life plus. And so what they did was they used me as an example, as many other animal rights and environmental activists have experienced over the last 5 years or so. Intensely, of course. People have been persecuted and harassed for decades, but we've really, I think it's fair to say, since 2001, we've really seen a pretty intense escalation of targeting animal rights and environmental activists as terrorists, and then slapping them with some of the most egregious sentences that we've ever seen for cases like Eric McDavid, where he didn't even do anything. He was accused of plotting to do something. And so the thing is that they want us to be scared. They want to make examples of us so that way all of you folks don't get active and don't climb buildings and don't climb trees and don't free horses and bunnies from extermination. And so we have a choice. We can live in fear, or we can live in a place of true love. And I know that this is a conference that's, if I'm not mistaken, is centered around a certain element of Christianity. So I think pretty much everyone in this room knows what true love is about. And unfortunately, most of our institutions in this culture don't have a clue what true love is. What I know is that my love for this planet and all creatures is the deepest motivating factor to all of the activism that I've been part of. And we can live in a place of love, or we can live in a place of fear. All of our institutions, actually even a lot of organized religions, revolve around fear, not love. I grew up in a Catholic church, okay? I know about fear. I know about the indoctrination of, the more shame you feel, the more guilt you feel, you just confess and you give money and then you'll be saved. I wrote a little song that goes, organized religion, hard at work, trying to bring you down and make you feel like a jerk, but if you're filled with guilt and shame, you're well behaved, so give us money, pray, and you'll be saved. So anyway, the thing is that they wanted to squelch my spirit. They want to squelch the spirit of these movements and the activists that choose to take a stand and put our lives and our bodies on the front lines. And if they can make examples out of us, if they can instill fear in others, to say, hey, don't be like Tre, don't be like Eric or Marie, because you're going to end up like them, then it's a very, very useful and effective tactic to keep dissent squelch. Well, we are the majority, okay? As many resources as they have and as many people as they want to hire, us non-government entities, are the majority, and we have the power, we have the critical number right here in our grasp. If 10,000 people went out and started burning shit down, they wouldn't be able to fill the jails with that many people. Well, they might try. But if 10 million people did, we're like more than 300 million. So even if 1/10 of the population, 30 million people, went out and started speaking their heart, speaking their mind, and taking actions, what do you think the government is going to do? They don't have the capacity to lock up 30 million people, even though they'd like to. So the thing is that we all have the power to make this world the place that we want to live in. We have the power to make the change. We have the power to have things be more equal and more healthy and more loving and more kind and more beneficial to all living beings, not just us humans, but all of our fellow animal friends, to the trees, for the next 7 generations. There's a native saying that goes, in every deliberation we must consider the next 7 generations. And another one that goes, we as humans did not create the web of life, we are but one thread within it. And everything we do to the web, we do to ourselves, because all things are bound together and all things connect. So maybe a little bit of my story, and certainly some of what Lauren shared, be not a deterrent, but an inspiration to get active, to follow your heart and follow your passion and do something. I don't care what you do. I'm not advocating any one thing for the feds that are listening. Just go do something. Do something. Be mindful of your food choices. Be mindful about if you drive an automobile rather than taking a bicycle. And all the implications, not just what's going on in the Gulf, but the people that are dying in the Niger Delta, so Shell Oil can put the gas into your car. So we need to be mindful about what we purchase and where we choose to spend our money and our energy. Because even if you don't vote, every time you spend money, you're voting. You're voting for a product, you're voting for a good or a service. You're saying to that company or that business or that corporation, I support you. I like what you're doing. Keep it up. But if you look, and there's so much information out there, not just on the web, but there's a lot of great groups that are putting out a lot of information about the darker side, the things that you don't see in the media, the things that you don't read in the newspaper, see on television. We owe it to ourselves to educate ourselves and to be very mindful and very practical about what we choose to buy, what we choose to do, how we choose to live our lives. And a Buddhist philosophy is every thought, every action, every word, every choice is contemplated beforehand. And if we look at this apple, or this pear or a coconut, in our hand, just the food that we eat, and say, where did this come from? How much fossil fuels were used to get this into my hand? Who suffered? How were the workers treated? Were they paid well? How many beings suffered so that I could have this coconut shipped from Thailand? And so it's very incumbent upon us to buy local, to support local farmers, to grow our own food. There's a whole movement of like food, not lawns, And so we have this power, and the more that we communicate, and the more that we educate, and the more that we all collaborate together, then we don't even need to answer to the cops. We don't even need to give them an explanation. Probably one day they'll join us. If they can't beat us, join us, right? Well, we have the power. Don't let the system take your power away. Don't let them fool you into thinking that they have more power than you, because they don't. Because we have something that they don't have, and that's the love. Thank you all for listening.